Hi, my name's Steve Yalosov, and I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about grading, what it's all about, and how we can make it a better experience for students. Grading, unfortunately, is not focused on learning. Grading is focused on sorting students. And I've discovered that I don't like that very much. I don't like it for my students. I care more about them learning the material than me being able to say that this student is better than this student. And so how do I do it? I do it by using something that some people call mastery grading, other people call it specifications grading. It doesn't really matter what you call it, but I'm trying to do it and I'm struggling. So let me tell you a little bit about my thoughts on grading, and then we'll see what you think. So recently a book came out called Ungrading. The ungrading movement actually started in the 1800s, right about the time when grades started to become a thing. And even in the 1930s, the president of University of Chicago decided they weren't going to have grades anymore. Well, didn't work out so well. They quickly brought grades right back. So why do we talk about it now? Well, I think one of the reasons we talk about it now is that we've learned a lot more than before. Now we have a lot of evidence that exams don't really measure anything useful. Assessment is a really mixed bag. So in my class that I teach, which is a team-based, project-based type class based on what Eric Mazur has developed, I use things like Perusall and other tools, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So again, before we go any further, I want to hear your thoughts on what you think about grading is. Should grading sort our students, or should grading get out of the way and we should focus instead on what students are actually learning, and more importantly than learning, what they're actually going to retain many years later. So you can push that little button right there to pause it and put in your thoughts, and when we come back, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my approach to ungrading. And I call it ungrading because obviously the only real ungrading is not to give grades at all, or to ask the student what do they think their grade should be, and then you just go with that. I wish that would work in my institution. Sadly, if I did that, everyone would say they'd want an A and they wouldn't do any work because they'd be focused on their other courses because they're very grade focused. And I wish that wasn't the case. But let's hear your thoughts. All right. Let me tell you my approach to ungrading, or mastery grading, which I'll call it, and many people have different names for it. It starts with understanding how I teach my course. So I gave up lecture a long time ago, mostly on the advice and listening to Eric Mazur, the person who actually started Perusall. And I really think that was a good decision. All of my classes are so much more fun to teach. I think the students learn so much more, and although I can't quantify it, I'm not an education researcher and I don't want to be, but I feel it really works, and I feel from anecdotal testimonials of students that they really appreciate what I've done. So what do? First, I take advantage of the diversity in the classroom. I teach large classes, at least 80 students. Next term, I'm teaching 150 students in a very large flat space, and the university's buying me new furniture so that we can have teams of 6. And more importantly, they're supporting me with the appropriate number of instructional staff, namely undergrads. But I digress. So I first take advantage of the diversity I get in the classroom. Now this goes beyond race and gender. It also includes, I get students who are freshmen, I get students who are seniors, so I get lots of different experience levels, and I want to mix those. I get students from aerospace engineering, from mechanical engineering, from chemical engineering, bioengineering, material science, and so I mix the disciplines. I want to use as much diversity as I possibly can when forming these teams. Once the teams are formed, we then think about what do the students actually do. By the way, I use CAPME to form the teams, this thing called Team Builder. It's very inexpensive and it works really well for large classes. So what do? Well, the first introduction to the material is, as you probably guessed, reading, using Perusall, this social document. And I think Perusall is great, and the students really, really learn a lot. Before they even come to class, they've had this whole asynchronous discussion about the material. When they get to class, because they've done that reading, I can jump right in and do things at a deeper level. I don't have to cover the simple stuff because they got that. So I give them activities. I use a tool called Learning Catalytics to deliver the activities to the students to watch real-time feedback, but there's lots of ways to do this. When the students have done several examples, and I expect them to go, they all have whiteboards, so I expect them to go to the whiteboard and actually solve the problems or do the activity on the whiteboard. I also insist they bring web-enabled tablets so they can use the internet. If it's in Google, why are we teaching it? And the most important thing that happens in class is these undergraduates I hire, our university calls them instructional aides. Well, I call them something else. I call them, instead of IAs for instructional aides, I call them IAs for inclusion ambassadors. Their number one role is to make sure that they draw out the introverts and tamp down the extroverts. Because, again, research has shown that the best way to drive mutual respect for team members is to make sure that every voice is heard so that team members can actually see and listen to what somebody brings to the team. That's what my instructional aides do. Yeah, they also know the material, and yeah, they can help them, but the truth is, once a team starts working in a strong way and relies on each other, they don't need any more help. They can teach themselves the material. At least that's been my experience over 10 years now, 15, 12 years. Long time. Anyway, I give training to the students. We do little scenarios. I tell them always pull them aside so they don't embarrass them in front of their peers. And I tell them they can, if they have trouble, we meet once a week and we actually talk about the individuals in the class who the instructional aides or inclusion ambassadors are having difficulty with. And I give them hints and tips of how they can approach them the next week. And if that doesn't work, they should contact me. Well, I've been doing this for, 6 years now, and not once have I had to intervene. They've been able to work it out by themselves. And these are just juniors or seniors who are teaching this, who have taken this course, and they're great. It's amazing. So I have one inclusion ambassador for every 2 teams, maximum of 12 students, and that seems to work. Because of that, I don't need as much TA support, so it's actually cheaper for my institution. So that's how we do things in class. Now, we do a lot of other things, and other people have talked about this style of teaching. We do homework where we don't grade the homework for accuracy, just for effort. They turn in their first effort on our learning management system. We use Canvas. They come to class and I give them time in class to go over the homework and make a better solution. Then they go home and they have a week to mark up their original document. They circle things in blue that are math errors or algorithmic errors. I don't care if they make them, but I care very much they catch them. And if they didn't really understand how to start a problem, they circle something in red, and those things they write a short reflection on. We grade the reflection, and the reflection is the marked up work plus whatever they write about things in red. And we only grade that for honesty, because homework should just be for practice. We just want the students to do it. Then we give readiness assurance activities. This is a short online computer-graded exam that's kind of an exam, but you'll see it's not quite. They take 6 or 7 questions. They have about 20 minutes to a half hour to do it. It's summative. They're not told if it's right or wrong. It's closed book, closed notes, closed internet, no talking. But right after that's done, they get the exact same quiz, but now it's open book, open notes, talk to your teammates, and every time the team puts in an answer, they get told if it's right or wrong. And they have multiple chances to get the right answer, albeit at lower credit. Then I weight that 85% of the grade is the team-based version, and only 15% is the individual. So it shouldn't be hard for a strong team to always get a 90% or better, which I'm calling mastery. So again, we have all of these different kinds of units, and then I do one final unit to drive home retention, which is at the end of the unit after the homework reflection, after the RAA, after they've done their reading. Then they have to choose 2 of the outcomes from every session. Usually each session will have 5 or 6 outcomes that we expect them to learn. They get their choice of the ones they think they're most passionate about, and they grade themselves on whether or not they've mastered those 2 outcomes. But that's not enough. They have to also provide evidence that they mastered those outcomes. This evidence can come from the way they did their homework assignments, discussions they had on their team. They can use, from the RAAs, anything they want, as long as they can convince me and the people grading it that indeed they mastered. The bar's low. Again, 0, 1, or 2. A 2 is an A, but they need to master it. So, those are the different activities we do. So what about mastery grading? Well, I just take all the activities and call them all units. So we have 2 sessions, class sessions a week in about 14 weeks. So that's 24 Perusall assignments that count as 1 unit that they must master. Then we have 1 homework activity with the homework reflection. That's 14 per term. And then we've got, 12 per term. And then we have the RAA. There's 12 of those in the term. And then we have the outcomes reflection, which is another 12. And then we also have 3 projects. Only the last 2 count. And that counts for another 3 units for each of those projects. So that's what I do. I end up with something like 72 units. Now it sounds a little complicated, but it's really not. I'll show you right here, I'll show you how we communicate to the students to let them know how many units we've got. And I have a whole flow chart for the way our course works. It's all done in modules in Canvas, so it's very easy for the students to follow. Of course, when one module starts, it continues when we introduce material for the next module, and it's all nested. I also give the students a chart where I tell them how much time I expect them to spend each week on every single activity so that they're not spending absurd amounts of time. Finally, we have a token system which allows students to recover if they did poorly on 1 or more units so they can still earn a high grade. I do that by, they have to first make a About Me video so I get to know who they are. That counts as a token. If they've done poorly on any material, say it's the unit on diffusion, then they can watch or go to one of our department colloquia that term. And believe me, there's diffusion in just about all of those. They have to discuss in a short paper how the speaker used diffusion to get the kind of results they needed for the conclusion of that talk. They write that up. I think that's a pretty good replacement and shows that they've actually mastered that topic. And they can do that as many times as they want. So that's what I do. And then I simply look at how many units they've mastered. If they've mastered 90% or more, they get an A, etc. So that's how I've been doing mastery grading. It's worked well. The students work hard. The average grade in my class was an A-. The median was an A- last term. And I feel good about that because they all worked really hard. So anyway, that's what I do. We're going to take a short break. You can push that button, and now I want to hear how you might use some of these ideas, or better yet, tell me some ideas I've never thought of to how I can roll in different kinds of activities and units for a team-based, project-based course. Right. The final thing I wanted to talk about was the fact that I'm not happy with what I'm doing. I still have problems. Students still will, if they want to get a B in the course, they'll work really hard and then they'll just stop and they stop coming to class. That's not what I want. I want this to be something where they all get an A because they've mastered all the material. I really don't like the idea of pass-fail, right? You need a C to get a pass. What good is that? I feel it should be excel-fail. They need to excel in everything. And I'm not quite sure how to build that in without being too onerous. The other thing I'm unhappy with is the reception of my students to Perusall. They don't like Perusall. They don't like it because they are unbelievably efficient at spending the least amount of time to get the highest possible grade in all their courses. This is what they did in high school to be able to get into Michigan, and they're really good at it. And guess what? They do it without reading the book. So in my class, they have to read the book, and they're a little upset about it. Some of them, by doing it, realize how much they're learning, and that's okay. That's great. But I worry about half the class that really hates my guts because I make them read the book. So I'd love to hear ideas that any of you might have for making Perusall a little less onerous for the students. I'm going to keep using it because I see the value in it, and I know it's valuable, especially all of the social interactions that happen. but how do we make the students appreciate that we're trying to make them passionate about those intrinsic motivators, the beauty of the topic? I love material science. I think everybody should love material science. And how do I convey that to my students in the context of doing that first step with Perusall? So with that, thank you very, very much for listening to me. Please leave some comments. I'd love to hear your ideas. I'm hoping that your ideas will allow me to teach my course in a much better way next term. Thank you very much.